Student learning assessment in virtual environments, strategies and methods. Learning outcomes. Attendees will identify various indirect and direct assessment methods, recognize authentic assessment in the design of their online courses. Presented by the Office of Educational Effectiveness. The Office of Educational Effectiveness, built on a strong foundation of skill and capacity in assessment and an institutional level repository of knowledge, strives to ensure high quality, systematic, continuous, and rigorous assessment of student learning and success, as well as instructional and program effectiveness. Our small but highly qualified team of personnel have content expertise in program review and evaluation, educational measurement, assessment and methodology, and assessment reporting, and will employ these assessment skills to provide learning assessment oversight and support, management of comprehensive program review, assessment of teaching effectiveness, outreach and training of faculty and staff, and assessment support, collaboration, and consultation. For more information or details about our office, please go to our website at buffalo.edu/OEE. Start with student learning outcomes. You should already have a syllabus with learning outcomes, an instructional and assessments plan for your seated or hybrid course. Don't reinvent the wheel. Start with your outcomes and existing assessments and adapt them to virtual delivery. Consider actions students take to learn. Review the action verbs that are used to define your learning outcomes. Bloom's taxonomy. Consider your assessment plan for measuring those outcomes, methods, and criterion. Think about how you might improve your students' ability to meet those outcome actions. Be sensitive to their need to have a sense of belonging and of self-actualization. Maslow's hierarchy. These ideas may not be as obvious to students who are learning remotely. Identify course content to target. Look at the specific knowledge and skill development required to meet each outcome criterion and where in your course content and assessment plan they are targeted. Consider whether the student will need background understanding to succeed. Consider if there are opportunities to check on student progress, to get and give feedback as learning progresses. Prepare instructional methods. By reviewing your outcome and assessment plan, where in your course content you are measuring learning, you will have a good understanding of where students approach learning tasks, the content they will encounter, the tasks and activities you expect them to gauge their success with, the interactions and data points that will inform you of their progress, and finally, the assessments they will complete to demonstrate the knowledge and skills they are mastering. Define how the learning will be recognized. Determine whether the instructional formats and methods you have identified will provide a means to check for understanding, are flexible enough to respond to misunderstandings, are defined with enough detail for students to understand what is expected of them, are accompanied by a rubric to help guide learning activities and to measure learning, and have clearly defined point scales so students understand the importance of each learning activity. Make adjustments as needed. Consider breaking content into more digestible chunks with regular interactions to help guide students and to help you recognize student engagement. Identify assessment modalities. Keep in mind that your assessments should be able to provide insight into the effectiveness of your instructional design, content, tools, timing, how accessible your content is to your learners, physical and psychological, the effectiveness of your assessment methods, and the overall course requirements and program design. Traditional assessments are written testing typically completed within a specific amount of time, where each question has a single correct response. These assessments are typically driven by course content and promote periodic knowledge and memorization. Authentic assessments require application of what students have learned to a new situation, demand judgments to determine what information and skills are relevant and how they should be used. These assessments are characterized by real-world situations and allow appropriate opportunities to rehearse, practice, consult resources, select alternatives, get feedback, and refine performances and products. Embedded assessments are activities completed by learners as part of the progress of instruction. These assessments can be traditional or authentic and are characterized by providing formative and progressive assessment data about a particular learning outcome, often using a rubric both to present expectations and rate success, but can also take advantage of student feedback, interactions, tool analysis, and use analytics available through a learning management service, logins, time on task, interaction with embedded content, tests, quizzes, discussions, surveys, and user details like demographics, career, standing, etc. Direct and indirect assessments can be traditional or authentic, formative or summative, and embedded. To help think about what separates the two, consider, does the assessment measure the learning or is it a proxy for learning? Who decides what was learned or how well was it learned? Direct assessments collect evidence of student learning or achievement directly from students and the works they submit, such as capstone course evaluation, course embedded assessment, faculty-generated tests and examinations that collect work samples, commercially produced standardized tests and examinations, portfolio evaluation, pre-test, post-test evaluation, and video and audio evaluation. Indirect assessments are analysis of reported perceptions provided by students, faculty, third parties, or other vehicles or proxies, such as standardized testing, student surveying and exit interviewing, co-op and internship employer surveying, curriculum and syllabus analysis, test and assessment vehicle reports, and course evaluations. Identify appropriate assessment timing. There are 3 timings for assessments: formative assessment, embedded assessment, and summative assessment. Formative and embedded assessments offer you the opportunity during course and assessment planning to build flexible content into your instructional methods. This flexibility will allow you to respond to student needs proactively as learning opportunities in a way that can help define the effectiveness of instruction and help increase the rate of student success. Formative assessments are an integral part of effective teaching. Formative assessments collect detailed information used to improve instruction and student learning prior to or during the progress of instruction. What makes an assessment formative is not the design of a test, technique, or evaluation, but that it is used to inform in-progress teaching and allow for redirection of instruction in response to student need. Summative assessments are deliberately set apart from instruction. They are used to evaluate student learning, skill acquisition, and academic achievement at the conclusion of a defined instructional period, typically at the end of a project, unit, course, semester, or program. Summative assessments are characteristic of the time they take place after learning is completed. They are evaluative rather than diagnostic and are scored as part of final averages or permanent records. Timing and changing the stakes. Consider instructional needs versus wants. Remember Maslow's hierarchy. Think about instructional options that provide continuity and community. Transition to more compact essential items, or student self-assessments to lessen the stakes without reducing the impact on learning. Allow opportunities for students to engage with the instruction and their peers. Provide opportunities for student feedback and respond to their feedback in a timely manner. Plan for appropriate assessment formats. Traditional assessments are the most widely employed assessments, but may not provide the deepest insight into instructional technique, student learning, and overall course and program assessment. A well-balanced mix of traditional and authentic assessment will provide a more holistic understanding of student success and has the potential to provide more direct measures for areas to improve content and instruction. Traditional assessments are typical of standardized written testing with selective processing. They promote memorization and are a proxy measure of student ability and knowledge. Traditional formats are characterized by selecting a response, contrived engagement, recall and recognition, teacher structure directed, and indirect evidence. Authentic assessments are typical of real-world applications of course content and are a more direct measure of student ability to evaluate, apply, create, and synthesize. Authentic formats are characterized by performing a task, real-life engagement, construction and application, student-structured, directed, and direct evidence. Additional measures. Test and survey analysis reports and analytical data from course management tools and learning management services can add additional detail to interpretation of traditional and authentic measurements of learning. The real separation between traditional assessments and authentic assessment comes from the way instructional measures are structured and whether the measures are embedded in learning or deployed after learning is complete. Authentic assessment can be employed as a higher stake summative measure in much the same way as traditional assessment can be used as a lower stake formative or embedded measure. In review, start with your outcomes. Be aware of the actions you are asking your students to take. Be mindful of the methods you will use to check on those actions. Consider chunking your content into smaller, more accessible and digestible content. Consider community and peer-to-peer interaction. Provide opportunities to get and give feedback. Be clear in your instructions. Consider using rubrics to help inform students about expectations. Make pointing clear and tied to actions, and identify the stakes. Allow students to lead instruction. Use a variety of methods. Provide alternatives. Look for data points to guide engagement and enhance measurement. Sharpen your saw. Attempt what you ask your students to undertake. Consider needs. Focus on knowledge and skills students should build. Simplify instruction to support that. I hope this overview of assessment has helped to center your understanding and will be a helpful guide as you evaluate your seated course design with the goal of transforming it into effective and responsive remote instruction. Okay, so student learning assessment in virtual environments. Go back. Okay, so there was the overview, and we're now on the spot of the session where we're going to have an open discussion. So I've just unmuted everybody. If you want to, and I'm going to set so that you can allow yourselves to mute and unmute. So we can open the floor to questions and talk about this topic.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts?
I'm just typing something into chat, Tom, for you, a question. These two.
Well, you guys are doing a little thinking. What we're going to do is hopefully be able to look at a few other pages. This particular page, our OEE homepage, where we can talk a little bit about our assessment model. And as it sort of clicks through and plays each aspect of how we think about the process of assessing programs, courses, faculty, student work, the overall idea is that this process should be a cycle. And while we don't want to tell you that it can never end, what we do want to point out is that it should always be about refining where you are. Each time you make an improvement, each time you make a change, what you've essentially created is a new idea or a new object or a new process. And even if it's perfect at that point in time, you should be able to look at the outcomes from that change and as a new beginning, and think again about how you could refine or improve the product. If it's your teaching, great. If it's a lecture, great. If it's a test or a project, this process can be iterated over any of those kinds of things. So we have a question. What are the specific considerations for large classes? Several faculty are concerned about transitioning their class activities to virtual environments. How long is this going to take? How difficult would it be? And that was from Athena, and that is an excellent question. I'm going to go back to our last slide, and I think I'm going to jump to a slide that might be able to help us out. So when you're thinking about moving seated or hybrid content online, consider the steps that you're going to have students go through in order to interact with their learning. In a classroom, you are the conductor of that, and a lot of the learning that actually takes place, I like to think of as accidental. You respond to a question, a student responds to your statement, something happens in the classroom, something is exposed about an idea, and the students in the classroom are able to take part in that simply because they're there. That kind of accidental learning does not happen so readily in a remote environment. So you need to think about ways to improve that. One of the things you can do is have the students lead more of that activity. Breaking your overall piece of instruction down into smaller parts so the students can actually take part in the instruction is a good way to do that. If you have, several hour-long lectures that include some pre-work, some lecture, some refinement, some review, maybe an exercise, break each of those pieces out, and then in between each of those pieces have some way for students to give feedback or for you to check on progress and engagement, and also provide feedback back to them. By doing that, you'll actually lessen your overall work requirement because you're not having to wait for a large influx of output from the students to show that they understood or are dealing with problems or don't understand the content you delivered. By moving along in smaller pieces, you're able to interrupt that larger work at the end by doing smaller work in progress. Like a work reduction program almost for teaching.
The faculty always have concerns that it's going to take them more time than less time, especially with writing assignments. And they don't necessarily, I guess, trust that the students will discover, I guess, pathways on their own. They feel like they need to lead them through the pathways, I guess, and give their particular feedback and all of that. So are there any strategies that you have for I guess, for getting them to come around a little bit more on that kind of thinking?
Yeah, and I think what the struggle is how to recognize that. Once again, while you're in the classroom and you can see your students, there's all of these little clues that you are able to tap into, body position, attention, verbal feedback, physical feedback, people raising their hands, people asking questions, people not looking at you while you're talking. Those kinds of things are all very important for a faculty member to understand whether or not the student is engaging. Well, that kind of feedback is a lot more difficult to gather if you don't put something in line in order to allow that to happen. And that's one of the benefits of cutting data up or cutting lectures up into smaller, more digestible pieces, because then you have an opportunity at each one of those cuts to get that feedback from the student. And it also puts the students into a little bit more control over how quickly they're moving through the content. Yeah. So let's imagine you've got a 1-hour lecture. And if you really look at that 1-hour lecture, how much of that lecture is actual discovery about knowledge gained or skills learned? Probably not a whole lot. And it's probably summative. Maybe there's a little formative where you might ask about some reading that the students had done or some preparatory lab work or something like that. But the largest part of that lecture is not about understanding where your student is, because you're going to do that while you're giving the lecture. If you cut your content up into smaller pieces, you can ask that question multiple times, and it can be asynchronous. So as your students are choosing to move through content quicker or slower or repeat or seek out help from another student, you can capture that information through the UI of the learning management system by tracking student access to different pieces of content. How long have they been in the content? What kinds of things are they clicking on? All of those things you can do in real time while the students are doing it asynchronously. And if you note that a student isn't interacting, then you can contact them directly. Or if you note that a student seems to be getting caught in a similar aspect of one part of the content, you can reach out to them and ask what the issue is. And that's going to, again, reduce your overall time having to try and figure out why is the student not getting to where I think they should be, if you don't have any of those data collection points in place.
Mm-hmm.
So it takes a little bit longer maybe to set that initial piece of content up as a bunch of smaller objects that are linked together. But in the end, you'll save yourself a lot of time trying to figure out where your students are, how they got there, or why they didn't get there.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if people are finding that there's limited knowledge, I guess, of the tools, or limited time for the faculty to practice with the tools, like for them to become comfortable in using them to assess these kinds of things, to dive a little deeper. So I don't know what people think about that or what experiences they've had, but.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from other folks. I will point out that on our homepage here, there is a link right here to a help page, and that will take you to this page. And on here are the CEI's sessions, the emergency preparedness courses through UB Learns. There's also a link to the SUNY Online educational resources. And then there's some information that we've put together here. And I'm going to be adding a link to this page also that has an excellent little video about embedding assessments that was done a few years ago. I mentioned a couple of times in the video and at the end there that you need to sharpen your own saw. You know, a lot of us are very good at public speaking. We're very good at picking up social cues. We're very good at getting a sense from the person in front of us about how well they're understanding what is unfolding. And the person doesn't have to say anything, and yet we're able to capture all of that. Again, that interpersonal aspect is very difficult to capture remotely, even with video sessions like we're doing today. For instance, my video isn't even turned on, so you can't see me while I'm talking to you. So a good part of the message I'm delivering is being missed, perhaps. So how do you capture that? Well, you know, one thing you can do is get familiar with the tool the student is using. If you're going to ask them to do discussions or you're going to ask them to make postings, you know, actually try and do one of the discussions, make one of the postings, find out how long it takes, and then think to yourself, was that productive? It took me 35 minutes to construct a post and pretend to reply to 3 posts. What did I really gain from that? Was it really helping my understanding of the task? Or did I get to a goal by doing that? And if the answer is, I don't know, or no, then I would recommend not doing that. Find something that quickly gets your student to the point they need to be. And if that's a peer-to-peer interaction, great. If it's a short little minute entry or exit card or a minute paper or a murkiest or muddiest point comment, then do that. You know, do the thing that is easier for the student to learn. And, you know, sometimes you just don't know what those things are, so provide 2 or 3 options and let the student take leadership and where they're comfortable. If they're more comfortable responding to your initial statement, then let them respond to the initial statement in your discussion board. But also allow them to submit you a murkiest point paper or send you an image of what they don't understand and take it offline And that little 2-minute offline conversation you have with that student might be worth capturing and returning to all the students. And in that short little 2-minute interaction and maybe 4 or 5-minute reply to the whole course, you have enlightened everyone in the course. And if you had tried to figure that out and put it into a lecture, you might have spent an hour doing it and not gotten there.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
This is Kelly Oona from Academic Integrity. I just want to second Tom's point there, because when students are given tasks that they don't see the purpose of, or they think are just time fillers, meaningless, that's when cheating is much more likely to happen. So the more you can make the assignments and the tasks for students to have a purpose, so that they can actually overtly see how the purpose is linked to what they're supposed to be learning in the course, the more we decrease the likelihood that they're going to want to do something dishonest.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. The idea of comfort is so important when you think about the way humans react situationally. It's well known that people who are sitting in a comfortable chair learn more. People who are in comfortable clothing, in a comfortable chair, in a room that feels welcoming, learn more. And it just goes on. The more you add to that need for that individual, the more you give them physical and psychological reinforcement, the better chance you have of teaching them something, and the greater chance they have of succeeding and understanding what you're trying to explain. So give them that opportunity. Give them the opportunity to lead their instruction. That doesn't mean that you're going to let them take over teaching. It just means you're going to provide a couple of different pathways to that same content. And it's really easy to do. Take that action point in your lecture and say, okay, that's my action point. And I would normally talk about it for 40 minutes. Well, you're not going to do that online. Instead, say, why am I talking about it? And then put that piece of content online. And then say to yourself, what do I hope they'll learn from me talking about it? And put that piece of content online. And these might be, you might be surprised at how quick and easy it is to put these things online. It might only be a sentence or two and an image. And then let them tell you about those things. And then as the students look at that content and exchange, they feel engaged, which helps them feel comfortable, which includes the chances for them to have a successful engagement. All the while, each one of those little pieces of engagement that they do, you can track through the service, through Blackboard, through your email exchanges, whatever tool you're using. Usually there's some way to look at the level of interaction. And right away, you will see what students aren't interacting or what students are interacting a lot. And you may be able to say offline to the students who are interacting a lot, I noticed you really seem comfortable with this. Could you pick 2 students out and ask them how they're doing, and give the students the chance to help you interact with the rest of the class and help get the rest of the class engaged.
I like that idea. It's interesting. I don't know a lot of people that have done that as much. I used to see that a lot at the dental school with labs. People would partner up with labs and partner certain students up that sort of knew, achieved mastery sooner with other ones.
Yeah. Think about how many years our students have spent going to a classroom. They're very comfortable with that idea. A lot of them think of going to the classroom as the start of their learning for the day. And so, they're at home now, or they're remote in some fashion to what they usually think of as their learning environment. So you have to find a way to get them to engage in that process again, get them to think about going online or opening your piece of remote instruction as equivalent to going to the classroom. And the best way to do that is to try and build some kind of community around that event. You know, if you can get students to exchange information with each other, the first thing they have to do to participate with a piece of content or a piece of learning is to have an exchange with another student, then that might help build that sense of community. And if those students are in a group that you've created in your course and they report out to the other groups, now the groups of individual communities can get together into a larger community. And if you let that happen in a plastic and natural way, then, and a student guided way, then it's going to feel more real to them. If you try and guide that or you try to direct that, I guarantee you, you will not get the best response from your students.
I think for me, the big challenge is I have well over 300 students. The vast majority are freshmen. They're often pretty passive. They, like the rest of us, procrastinate. I am afraid that this is going to snowball, and at the end of the semester, they will be so far behind. And then the ability to—
I don't know if there is sound on that.
it's such a challenge to keep them moving along. And I can't be in contact with them all individually.
Yes, we got somebody who is talking over you, but I think if I got your question, Judy, I'm going to repeat it. So you're saying that in your rather large course, you are concerned that a good portion of the students are not going to be following along and or are going to hold off on getting their work done until the last minute. And that's a great worry. It creates a number of different problems, especially if you're trying to run your class in a largely synchronous fashion, where the work of other students is going to impact the ability of everyone to get their work done. Like in a discussion board is a perfect example. A lot of times faculty will think, okay, I'm going to put a comment in a discussion board. I'm going to have every student add their thought, and then I'm going to ask that each student make a thought about two other students' thoughts. Well, if only 5 students make the first thought, that process, that, you know, organic process never happens, and students get frustrated and get behind. So I'm going to say it again, and the best advice I can give you is think about ways that you can reduce the high-stake nature of your larger piece of content by making it into smaller pieces of content. And by high stakes here, I'm not talking about the student's grade. I'm talking about your ability to get them the information they need. If you put a lot of value on one particular piece of content, and it's a pivotal piece of content, find ways to get students to that content through multiple avenues. And find ways to check, be able to check on whether or not students have gotten there. And if you have incentives to get there earlier or to get the work done to a certain level, you will find that students will tend to comply with that, particularly because it's quicker to get it done. They know they're not going to get a full grade on it yet. They're only going to get a evaluative grade, and then they're going to have a chance to rework it or to improve it. And so they'll start thinking of the work as progressive instead of summative, if that helps. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It does make sense. I'm not sure if I can.
Yeah, the trick is figuring out how to do it.
Yeah, and I do give them weekly quizzes, but I'm doing that now through UB Learns, but I think even if I did it through Respondus, there's no way for me to really know they're doing their own work and then to really assess, are they learning this? Are they just copying? Are they looking at their notes while they're answering the quiz questions? I just fear that the grades are not going to be representative of what they actually know. And most of these are going into health professions like nursing and pharmacy. And so it really scares me that they won't know, this is an anatomy class, that they won't know what they need to know, and I can't really clearly assess it.
Yeah, so think about objects that the students could produce that could show you the same thing. So in your quiz, you might have 10 questions, let's say, and you've identified each of those 10 questions as separate pieces of content, and that they're approaching 5 knowledge points you're concerned that the students should have at this point in time. So you've got 2 questions for each knowledge point. Well, maybe what you could do instead is come up with a piece of content the students themselves need to create that indicates their ability to approach that concept, to explain that concept, to take it apart and construct a new piece of information that they then use to articulate their understanding of the other 2 or 3 knowledge points. And then that artifact is submitted to you. Instead of a test, you have now an artifact. And that should give you a really clear idea of that student. Once you get to know that student, you should be able to have an idea how authentic the work is. And if you ask them to do things in their hand, as opposed to typed or entered into a discussion board post, you'll also be able to get an idea of originality. So you're going to tell me, I know what you're going to say next. I have 300 kids. How am I possibly going to look at all that work?
That's what I'm going to say.
Yes. And I'm going to tell you, this is where you have to trust in your students as peers. And so if you came up with something like that that could address these 5 knowledge points, and the students first created this authentic work, and they then discussed each other's authentic work in a sizable group so they could actually have a discussion, 5 people or no more than 9 people in a group. And then that group interaction somehow gets reported back to you. Now, you still do not have a real sense at this point in time how original each person's work is. But what you will have an idea of which groups responded back, and of those groups, which groups seemed to have the concepts. Now you can do something with that. You can immediately realize what students are not participating. And one of the metrics that the group report back to you is how many of the students in their group are working. And you can real quickly split your class over a 1 or 2 day assignment into 2 groups, kids who are engaged and kids who aren't engaged. Then you can move on with maybe some kind of embedded test that would give you an idea now and the students a chance to master their ability to answer those questions, and make these questions difficult to answer, that they require a textbook to answer, they require web searching to answer. Don't make the test something that is something they are asked to memorize on. Make the test something that they have to dig through information to find the answer for. And it could still be a selectable answer, but the point is that they're going to go and dig through the content you want them to dig through. And then have them provide you with another piece of original work that is maybe a little bit more simple to grade. And I would recommend using a rubric to do your grading here. And at this point, I don't know, do you have any graduate assistants or TAs to help you?
No, I have some undergraduate students that do assist, like in the physical laboratory when we were able to have one, but I don't think that I could give them the responsibility to do this. They're undergrad, unpaid, their peers, actually, in a sense. So I don't know how much responsibility I could give them. And I want to say, I think your ideas are awesome, and looking forward, I would love to try those kinds of things. But right now, day by day, I am scrambling to convert my lectures and my labs into videos, and my quizzes into non-paper versions. And I don't know if I have the time to explore what you're saying right now, but I really like your ideas. So thank you.
Yeah, a first draft of this process could be as simple as taking a look at those larger lectures and those tests and quizzes that you're currently giving, and just break them up into smaller pieces of content with smaller tests, and give the students a chance to work through each of those smaller pieces. So it's still using, a more traditional kind of assessment and a more traditional kind of process. But what you'll get out of doing that is a quick look at where you can break your teaching down into smaller components. Then you can also get an idea of how that engagement piece can help you, because you'll be able to see how many students have gotten through the first 5 modules, which makes up that first lecture maybe. And part of that first module is maybe reading a short paper, 2 or 3 paragraph paper and 5 questions on a quiz. Maybe the next module is reading some chapters in a book and a 4 or 5 question test. And instead of, doing a paper, reading a chapter, listening to a lecture, and then having one exam, right? And so along the way, just by taking your standard, lecture, breaking it into pieces of text, followed by, short tests or quizzes, you give your students a chance to master it. You give yourself a chance to see who's engaged, and you can then take a look at where problems existed in answering questions. And when they do actually take the test, you can modify the test to maybe deal with or track some of those issues.
Thank you.
And Judy, this is Kelly Oona from Academic Integrity again, but I just want to make sure, are you aware in UB Learns when you design a test that you could put time limits on each question, so that if there's concern in an anatomy class, the students will be looking up answers, you can keep them to a certain number of seconds even in each question, and then not have them be allowed to go back to a question.
Right, and I would just add to that that you can also in UB Learns randomize questions and randomize answers.
Yep.
So that, even if students were communicating while they're taking the test, it looks like a completely different question because it's in a different order and the answers themselves are in a different order.
Yes, those are all good thoughts, and I'll add one additional thought to that. A lot of faculty have access to testing products, and within those products, you should be able to identify groups of questions on the same topic at the same difficulty level. So if you have 5 questions on your test, you put together 5 pools of questions to pick from. There's 3 or 4 questions in a pool. They all are questioning the same piece of knowledge. And if you present that test in a randomized order with randomized answers, picking a random question from each pool, the chances of any 2 students who may be cheating getting the same test is very, very low. And you don't have to worry about things like Respondus lockdown browser and proctoring, or for the lower stakes tests. You can move that kind of thing just to the higher stake test at the end of the unit or at the end of the session.
You can also do that in UB Learns as well. You can create test banks, like you said, with the number of questions, and then do that in the UB Learns format without having to use a separate software.
Thank you. That I will really investigate that. Thanks.
Okay, so we're just a few minutes from our allotted time. Keep in mind that there are more sessions this week, and you can get those on the CEI website at their emergency course building sessions page. And please do attend those. They all sound good. We'll also be doing additional versions of this session next week and the week after, I believe. And of course, you're more than welcome to contact any of us directly via email or in the old-fashioned way by phone. All right, thank you for attending and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Tom.